right, hello again. Today we are going to be reading in October Sky, chapter 16 and chapter 17. And so if you will get your book, and as always, you're going to want to get a pen because I'm going to be telling you some key points that you need to mark as we go along. So chapter 16 is a natural arrogance, and as a review, when we read chapter 15, two important things happened. One of them being that Mr. Turner finally agreed to have Mr. Hartsfield teach the calculus class. And only 6 people were going to be in it. And remember, Sonny himself, who was the one that really wanted the class to be taught, is not able to take it because his grades are not as high as the other ones. And Dorothy actually beat him out. And remember, at the end of the chapter, a really cool find, he finds his dad's old calculus book, that his dad had taught himself calculus for his job. So in this book, we're going to see that book come to play. And so chapter 16, it's called A Natural Arrogance, and you will see why it's called that as we go along. So turn in your book to page 265. During the last week of March 1959, Dad went off to Cleveland, Ohio for a mining engineering conference. He was to give a presentation on ventilation, a great honor for a man without an engineering degree. It was a strange sensation knowing that he was not in Colwood, not even in the same state. I felt uneasy without him nearby, but I wasn't sure why. In my nightly prayers, I always included by rote Mom and Dad, Jim, my uncles and aunts and grandparents, whether they were already in heaven or not, all the soldiers, sailors, and Marines, Daisy May, Lucifer, Dandy, Poteet, and Chipper too. For the entire week, I added a special request that my father come back safely from his long journey. My parents worked, and Dad came home with a paper bag full of gifts. Mom got a faux pearl necklace. Jim got a pair of binoculars. I got a fountain pen. The night after his return, Dad came upstairs and peeked into my room and asked me what I was doing. Studying calculus, I replied. I didn't really want to discuss it with him because I was sure he'd criticize me for wasting my time. You told me Mr. Turner wasn't going to let you take calculus, he said in an accusing voice. I'm learning on my own, I answered, and reluctantly showed him the book I was using. He frowned. That's funny. I don't remember you asking if you could use my book. To divert him, I asked a question that I needed answered anyway. I pointed at an equation that defined the slope of a line. I don't understand this little triangle, I said. You're not getting anywhere if you don't understand that, he said. It's called a delta. Delta means change, the difference between one value and another over time. He went down on one knee and took the pencil from my hand. You see, if the y-coordinate and the x-coordinate change, the point they describe changes too. Then if you change the time period, he stopped in mid-sentence. If you're not getting your class, why are you learning calculus on your own? Dad, we're doing good down at Cape Colwood. Come see us. He stood up. Well, maybe when I have time. You always have time for Jim, I blurted out, surprising myself as much as him with my vehemence. Make sure you mark that word vehemence. That is one of your vocabulary words that you'll be tested on later. I let out a nervous breath. Just come and see, Dad, I said. As much as I detested myself for it, I heard pleading in my voice. He opened the door. I still haven't given up on you being a mining engineer. We could work together. I shook my head. I don't want to do that. You don't want? Little man, when you grow up, you're going to find out there's a lot of things you're going to have to do, whether you like it or not. Yes, sir, I know. But what I think doesn't mean a hill of beans to you, does it? That's not true. How could I explain? I struggled to find the words to tell Dad that just because I wanted to work for Dr. Von Braun, it didn't mean I was against him. And why couldn't he be as proud of me wanting to play rockets as he was of Jim wanting to play football? Jim was leaving Colwood too, wasn't he? You're not going to do anything I ask you to do, are you? Dad accused. Dad, I couldn't find the words. I cursed myself for my awkwardness in front of him. He gave me a look of such disappointment that tears came to my eyes. Then he left, firmly closing the door behind him. A tear rolled down my cheek. I wiped it away with my shirt sleeve. It disgusted me. How could I let Dad get at me like that? I knew he didn't understand what I was doing, but I was right, wasn't I? The future was somewhere else, not in Colwood. and I had to get ready for it. That's what Mom believed and a lot of other people too. But if I was so right and my father was so wrong, why did it make me feel so bad? If you'd just come to Cape Coldwood and see. Despite my disgust, the tears kept coming. As always, when I needed to clear my mind, I went over to my bedroom window and looked outside. Daisy May joined me, nuzzling my wet cheek. I could see miners moving up the old path, their lunch buckets glinting from the lights bolted high on the man-hoist. Other men were coming down the path, their work done. Every one of those men knew exactly who he was and what he was supposed to do. I wondered if the day would come, ever, when I would be able to say the same. I was sincerely beginning to doubt it. I arrived home from school the next day and found a note on my desk. Mr. Farrow called. Machine shop. How about we countersink the nozzle, one side or the other or both? Sonny, do you know enough to answer? Love, Mom. I sneaked a call in on the black phone to Mr. Farrow. I told him I thought countersinking the nozzle was a good idea. That meant the removal of cone-shaped material from each end, saving weight. I figured we'd get a little increase in altitude as a result. So you want to mark that in your book? I would underline the word countersinking and the fact that it means it's the removal of cone-shaped material from each end, saving weight. The men thought you'd like it, Sonny, Mr. Farrow said. As a matter of fact, Caton already did it. Got you a 3-footer ready, nozzle countersunk 45 degrees, both ends. You want to come get it? And also we were wondering if you might launch this weekend. When I said yes, Mr. Farrow yelled my answer to his machinist, and I heard a whoop. Tell that rocket boy we'll all be there, someone yelled, and then I heard them do a simulated countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, whoosh! I biked down to the big machine shop, finding the 3-footer laid out on a black cloth on a table in the rear of the facility. Besides the countersunk nozzle, Mr. Caton showed off his new design for attaching the fins to the casement. He had constructed a flange that ran an inch past the length of the fin on both ends and bent it to match the curve of the casement. 2 narrow straps cut from cold-rolled sheet steel were lapped over the extended flange and used to clamp the fins solidly in place. As beautiful as the design was, I worried over its weight. I also worried whether Mr. Caton had made too many changes at once. Nah, Sonny, Mr. Caton said. It would take you forever to find the best design if you only made one change at a time. I understood Mr. Caton, but I knew it would spur an argument with Quentin. Quentin preferred making our design changes one at a time, so if we had a failure, we'd know its likely cause. Mr. Caton used red paint to letter OCT 20 down the length of the shiny steel casement on one side, BCMA on the other. The wooden nose cone was also painted a bright red. We stepped back and admired our creation. It looked like a first-rate professional job. At school, I consulted with the other boys, and it was agreed we would load OCT 20 with melted rock candy the following Friday and fire it on Saturday. Quentin caught the school bus to Coldwood to help me do the loading and then spend the night at my house so we could get an early start. When he saw the changes Mr. Caton had made, his lip went out. He may be a first-class machinist, but he knows nothing about scientific principles, he said. To be successful, we must carefully test before making such modifications. I told him about my conversation with the machinist. I think he's right, I said. It'll take us forever your way. And when this rocket blows up and you don't have a clue what caused it? Quentin asked, his face pinched. What will you have learned then? The men down at Cape Canaveral say they learn more from a failure than a success, I countered. Then those men are full of crap. Is that what you think of me too? I barked at him. That I'm full of crap? No, Sonny, Quentin replied calmly. I think you're in a hurry. But for what, I have no idea. I knew how to cheer him up. That's right. I am in a hurry. You should be too. We're going to enter the science fair next year. The truth was, I had been quietly giving it some thought all along, especially with Miss Riley often asking me if I had decided to do it. She had been so good to me, getting me the book and all, that I wanted to please her. But what had truly pushed me into it was my anger toward Dad. If we won the science fair, that would show him, wouldn't it? I could wave whatever medals and ribbons we got under Dad's nose. If we lost, I would be no worse off than I was. Quentin immediately brightened at the prospect. Are you serious? That's wonderful. We'll win it all. County, state, and national. I know it. I put down the spoons I'd been using to measure the ingredients of the rock candy. Win it all? I thought you liked to take things one at a time. Quentin stared at me. Sonny, your parents can put you through college, can't they? I wondered how much I should tell Quentin about the kind of war being raged between my parents. Mom's talked about it, I said cautiously. I think she'll see that I go if I want to. Remember when we read earlier in the book that his dad had told him that if he would be a mining engineer, he would pay for his engineering degree. But remember, he didn't want to do that. So his mom had told him that there was something she had never told his dad. And that's that years before in South Carolina, she had put $1 worth of stock into Johnson & Johnson. And obviously, Johnson & Johnson became a huge, successful company. So she had built up enough stock to where she actually can pay for Sonny's college. But she hasn't told Homer. So that's why he knows that he will be able to go to college. Well, my parents can't pay for my college. They just barely keep me and my sisters in clothes and cornbread. I don't know about the other boys, but I bet their parents can't do much for them either. You know, and they all know too, that somehow we're all going. You're the key, Sonny. You're our ticket to college. Me? I felt like he'd handed me a sack full of rocks. Quentin, I don't know if they give out scholarships at the science fair, even at the national level. Medals and ribbons and such is all we get. It's for the honor of it more than anything. He shook his head at me, ever the patient teacher. Do you not understand how our audacity will be perceived? Do you not understand even now what we have already accomplished as coal miners' kids down in deepest West by God, Virginia? Perhaps there may not be a direct scholarship prize, but success will get us noticed by someone. It's our chance, Sonny. My chance. The imaginary sack of rocks got even heavier. So if you don't know what he means by that, it's like when he means imaginary sack of rocks, it's like now that he feels the pressure to win, not only to prove something to his dad, but also now he feels like he has even more pressure because if they aren't successful, then his own friends might not get a college scholarship. So it's kind of like a bag of rocks that would weigh you down. And that's how he's feeling. I thought our rockets were here to help us get jobs someday with Dr. Von Braun, but Quentin was saying they were for something much more immediate. I started to tell him to forget it. It couldn't possibly work out. But then I thought of Dad. I had my own reason to win, didn't I? When I turned my back to loading rocket candy, I felt something I had never felt before, powerful, confident, and angry all at once. It seemed a natural arrogance that felt good. All right, Q, was all I said. So you see where we've gotten the title for this chapter from. Og 20 zipped up the launch pole, accelerating 100 feet in an instant, climbing to 200 feet, 300 feet, hurtling vigorously toward the blue spring sky. Quentin and Billy jumped to their theodolites, but just as they got the angle on the speeding rocket, it exploded, and steel shrapnel rained down on Cape Colwood, while we boys scrambled back inside the blockhouse, and the machine shop crew backed away on the road. When we heard the last thunk of rocket remnants hitting slack, we went out and began collecting the pieces. The machinists morosely gathered around the blockhouse. I carried the largest piece of the rocket, a center section of the casement, to Mr. Caton. Our proud lettering along the side was scorched, showing only the K of the awk and only one X of the XX. Was it the countersink that made it explode, he asked. I don't think so, I replied. The blowout seems about a third up the casement. There's no way to tell what happened, Quentin muttered, bringing in a handful of fragments. You changed so many things at once. Who knows? So you do need to make a note, guys, that the rocket exploded in flight. Mr. Caton sorrowfully inspected the casement piece, running his fingers along the shredded ends. I never thought there was anything powerful enough to blow out a steel tube like this. Bursting pressure's got to be in the neighborhood of 20,000 pounds per square inch, even with the weld. What weld? Quentin demanded. Mr. Caton shrugged. I used a steel tube with a butt weld down the length of it. We don't have much of the seamless kind, too expensive. We used what we had on your last rockets. He turned the casement over. There's the weld right there. I looked and knew the reason for the failure when I saw a deep rent right at the nearly invisible stripe of weld. A butt weld was where the two ends of the steel sheet that made the tube were simply pushed together and welded. So they're kind of pushed together like this, and so the seam is welded like that. Okay, so such a joint was too weak for our rockets. There was just too much sustained pressure. So you need to make a note that that's why the rocket exploded, that all of the pressure on the rocket was too much for the welded seam that was made in the steel casement. The other machinists crowded in. A lap weld would have been better, Clinton, one of them said. Give you another 10,000 pounds of bursting pressure. A lap weld was where the two ends of the sheet were overlapped and then welded. So instead of them meeting at the seam and being welded, and I can see why that would explode easily, one was lapped over like this, so you don't have that gap, and then it's welded like that. So of course that's going to give you more strength. Yeah, and I got some of that, Mr. Caton said sadly. I don't know what I was thinking. Can we get seamless tubing, I asked, displeased at working with any kind of weld. I'd have to order it, Mr. Caton replied doubtfully. Your dad would have to approve. That's fine, I said firmly. I'll take care of it. Get your order going. I was certain that it was indeed okay for Mr. Caton to write up his order. If Dad didn't let me have the materials I needed, I'll still get them one way or another, no matter what it took, guile, tricks, or outright theft. I didn't need Dad. I let every juicy morsel of anger and bitterness well up inside me, making no attempt to stanch any of it. Instead of hating the feeling, I gloried in it. I was becoming tough, just like him. So now, Sonny is getting so much confidence in himself that he's getting a little bit arrogant. And he's got that pride of not wanting to depend on his dad whatsoever. So just make sure you made the notes of the important sections in this chapter, that Homer needs the seamless tubing, and he's not sure if his dad's going to get it, but he says he's going to get it somehow. So now we're moving on to page 274, chapter 17, called Valentine. You remember Valentine is the girl that likes Sonny. It was the golden age of rock and roll, even for us kids in deepest West Virginia. At night, when we could hear stations far from our mountains, we usually tuned to a station in Gallatin, Tennessee that played hearty black rock and roll. Although we didn't buy the Rezoid Royal Crown hairdressing that was hocked in between the songs, we came to love Chuck Berry, Laverne Baker, the Coasters, Fats Domino, Shirley and Lee, Ivory Joe Hunter, and Joe Turner. When Elvis and Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis came along, we listened to them too, usually on WLS out of Chicago, but our hearts were always with the black groups Gallatin brought us. And also anything Ed Johnson played. Where's Ed playing this weekend was the question we anticipated every Friday. Ed Johnson was the man who guided the classes of Big Creek High School through the golden era of rock and roll. A Marine who had island hopped across the Pacific from Tarawa to Iwo Jima. Ed had seen the world by the time he was 20 and come back to West Virginia to forget it. He worked a while in the mines and then hired on with high school as a custodian. He married twice and had children, although we were never certain of the number. The day would come when he would leave West Virginia and move to Florida, where he would be electrocuted while cleaning a swimming pool. But while he was with us, Ed Johnson was a one-man recreation department in blue jeans and a V-necked sweater, playing for our dancing pleasure all the latest records on his homemade hi-fi system. Ed's favorite place to play his records was the Dugout, which was actually the basement of the Owl's Nest restaurant just across the river from the high school. The Dugout was sparsely furnished, booth benches with backs on them along the walls, and support pilings scattered throughout the room that cut into the dancing space. It was also dimly lit, just a few pink and blue light bulbs in the low ceiling. There was a furnace with a coal pile beside it over in one corner. The dugout had nothing going for it except that we loved it. It was our little piece of rock and roll heaven. You could always tell how much you danced at the dugout if you pulled off your socks that night and looked at the black ring around your ankles from the coal dirt. Ed despised country music. To him it was plinkety-plunk and tacky, and therefore so did we. He played a mixture of slow and fast songs. The fast ones played if they had a good beat. He rarely played Elvis because Ed considered his music too fast to dance to and overly commercial. The slow songs he favored were heart-tugging, Dean Martin's Return to Me, Billy Ward's rendition of Stardust, Chances Are by Johnny Mathis, It's All in the Game by Tommy Edwards, and Anything by the Platters. The last song Ed played at the end of his dances was always Good Night, My Love by Jesse Belvin. Ed chose his music carefully, his dances having an opening act of excitement and greeting, a middle of pulsating, very danceable songs, interspersed with romantic interludes, and then the inevitable ending. So powerful was the selection that couples clung to one another during Good Night, My Love, as if it were not only the dance that was ending, but their lives. Sherman called on a Saturday in April, saying we needed to take a break from rocket building and go to the dugout. I agreed. I was pretty worn out anyway, trying to be tough and arrogant like Dad. I just wanted to be a normal kid again and go to a dance and be with other kids too. I told Sherman I thought maybe we could catch a ride over with Jim since he had the Buick, but by the time I got around to asking, he'd already taken off. Mom said he had spent even longer than usual getting ready for his date, so she had to be somebody pretty special. I didn't say it to Mom, but they were all pretty special to Jim. He had cut a wide swath through the girls of Big Creek High, leaving behind him a crowd of broken hearts. Sherman and I stood in the dirt on the other side of the gas station for only a few minutes before someone picked us up and took us to Coretta. After a few more minutes with our thumbs out, somebody else came along and took us all the way to War. There, we kicked down the street, easing into the sweet shop, and eating a hot dog and talking to the rosy-cheeked man behind the counter who complimented us on our pink shirts, black draped and pegged pants, white socks, and brown loafers. We were a proud pair, dropping by the pool hall, playing a quick game of 8-ball, and then, as the sky darkened, swaggering down the sidewalk. Susan Linkus, a pretty ninth grader at Ward Junior, waved at us from her front porch, and we howdied her, strutting even more. A block away, we could hear the muffled music coming from the dugout. The dance had been in a full swing for an hour. At the door we were greeted by a blast of warm air and the vision of shadowy dancing bodies. Ed, who knew everybody by name, greeted us. His latest girlfriend, a blonde young honey, stamped a black spot on the back of our hands after we gave her our quarters. Sherman saw a girl he liked and tapped her on the shoulder and hit the dance floor for about 10 straight. His weak leg made him dance a little funny, one foot turned out for balance, but it didn't keep the girls from wanting a turn with him. I edged into the darkness and saw Emily Sue and Tootsie Rose sitting on a bench and went over and talked to them. Connie Peary was home from college, and she snared me for a quick dance while her boyfriend was sneaking a smoke in the parking lot across the river. Ed was into the opening sequence of his middle act, the record's bouncy ones with good beats. I watched cheerleaders Kathy Patterson and Sandy Witt dance with their boyfriends. Kathy was an energetic, athletic dancer. Her boyfriend's shirt was soaked in sweat from trying to keep up with her. She waved to me and I waved back. She called out, "How are your Rockets doing?" And I nodded to say they were okay, and so was I. I was having a good time, all my worries about Rockets and everything else put aside. Rock and roll, being surrounded by my classmates and friends, were good medicine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Valentine with Buck Trant. I had been surprised during the last few weeks to see them sitting by themselves in the morning and at lunch, too. That usually meant something serious was going on between a boy and a girl at Big Creek. I didn't think Buck was anywhere good enough for her. I had no right to be jealous, of course, since I was committed heart and soul to Dorothy. But sadly, we know that Dorothy is not committed heart and soul to Sonny. She just really likes him for a friend. And we know that he wants it to be much more than that. Valentine and Buck were apparently having a quarrel. She spun on her heel after shaking her finger in his face and stomped out of the dugout. Buck hurried after her, whining, but Ed stopped him, said a few words, and I watched as a huge boy trudged silently back to a bench and slumped down. Sensitive to the ebb and flow of teenage romance, Ed often chose slow songs to get a couple back together. He was usually successful. I saw it more than once. The boy and girl, eyes closed, draped onto one another, swaying to Ed's romantic music, all forgiven. Ed made no such attempt for Buck. The boy was not one of his favorites. After a while, Valentine came back in and pulled Buck up for a fast dance. Buck shuffled after her, with his big hands hanging limply at his sides. Connie's boyfriend was back, so Emily Sue and I did a fast dance, and then I danced with Becky Hurt and Tish Hampton and Mary Grigor Rossi and Dana Beavers. I asked Malvy Sue Harlow, a 10th grader, for a slow dance, and then went back out on the floor for a chicken with Lucky Joe Adair. One foot out and then the other, our heads bobbing in time to the beat, bodies swirled around me, and I inhaled the wonderful, intoxicating aroma of sweat and perfume all mixed up. Sherman had disappeared into the shadows with his sweetie, but I was sticking to the lighted area, making myself available. That was when I saw Dorothy. I had never seen Dorothy at the dugout before. She was standing alone just inside the door, wearing a black skirt and a pale green sweater with the collar of a white blouse peeking out. She had her dancing shoes on. I perked up thinking she had come alone, but then I saw her date enter behind her with his 2 quarters in his hand. And you can just guess who this date is going to be. I recognized him. Recognized his flat top of blonded hair with the ornamental frontal curl, the snarly lips, the athletic lumber. My brother took Dorothy's perfect little hand, and together they walked out under the pink and blue lights and green and white crepe paper and began to dance to a booming Ed Johnson middle act song, syncopated by the sound of my broken heart shattering on the concrete floor. How I made my feet and legs move, I do not know, but they got me to an empty bench in the back where I sat as Jim worked his magic stuff on Dorothy in front of my eyes. I was a fascinated spectator in the way the surviving passengers must have been as they watched the Titanic sink. Other dancers swirled around the floor, and some girls even came and asked me to dance, but I did not respond. I was too busy dying 1,000 deaths. And then, oh my gosh, Ed played a slow song. It's All in the Game by Tommy Edwards. Many a tear has to fall, but it's all in the game. All in the wonderful game that we know as love. Anyway, I thought I'd give you a taste of what the song sounds like. Dorothy melted in Jim's arms. As my stomach tightened, he took his stubby hands and clasped them around her petite, perfect waist. While she tucked her head into his lumpish shoulder, her summer sky blue eyes closed, a contented smile on her perfect lips. Once in a while he won't call, but it's all in the game. Soon he'll be there at your side with a sweet bouquet, the song continued. I saw Jim lean back, pretend to hand Dorothy a bouquet, and when she took the invisible flowers, I felt my soul curl up and die, and then all the blood that was in my body drained completely to my feet. I was numb and in exquisite pain at the same moment. Sonny! It was Valentine. Would you like to dance? I looked up at her and then at her hand held out to me. I took it instinctively and she walked backward, pulling me to my feet. She bumped into Jim and Dorothy. Dorothy opened her eyes sleepily and Jim scowled, but they moved out of her way. Valentine draped her arms around my neck. We swayed to the song, and then Valentine's lips were brushing my ear, and I wasn't really thinking about Dorothy and Jim anymore. Then the song continued. Then he'll kiss your lips and caress your waiting fingertips, and your hearts will fly away. I cannot say that I remember leaving the dugout with Valentine. Then I thought about it later. I did seem to remember Ed patting me on the back in a special, urging way. Valentine and I had to cross the bridge to the parking lot in front of the high school, but I don't remember that either. I do remember Buck's old Dodge and Valentine opening the door and getting inside, scooting across the bench seat in the back, and then reaching across it to take my hand and draw me inside with her. Then she locked all the doors and settled back, her hands moving to her sweater. She shook out her hair as she dropped the sweater into the seat. She smelled of musk and desire, or was that me? She opened her arms and took me in. I thought I heard Buck knocking on the window and wailing something, but not much anymore. Valentine had found WLS, and the DJ was in a romantic mood. Love is a many splendored thing. It's the April rose that only grows in the early spring. Santo and Johnny's Sleepwalk was playing when I next came up for air, the windows of the Dodge steamy and gray, the heavier droplets making curving little translucent streaks down them. I rested on her, my cheeks so tight against her it was as if I was welded to her. After a while, she eased me up and out of the car. She leaned across the seat on her knees. Sweet chili, she said as she hugged me. She touched me on my nose. Other women will have you in your life, but nobody will have you first except me, and don't you ever forget that. And then she closed the door, and I knew it was time for me to go. I walked unsteadily back to the bridge where Buck waited, his arms resting on the rail, his head hung over the water. I stopped beside his bulk as if I were in a dream. It was crazy, but I felt no threat from him, even though he had to know it was me in his car with Valentine. And that's funny that he doesn't feel afraid, because if you'll remember, Buck has been the one that's kind of been picking on him all along. He's Jim's friend, and he's not been nice to Sonny at all, and he could kick his tail if he wanted to. But we see a different side of Buck tonight. Valentine started the Dodge and turned it around in the parking lot, then drove over the bridge and kept going without any apparent intention of coming back. Even though it was Buck's car, Buck turned to watch her go. "Oh, how I love that girl," he moaned. All of a sudden, I felt so sorry for Buck. He had been robbed of playing football a senior year, robbed of going to college, and probably robbed of ever making something more out of himself than what he was. I wanted to tell him how awful I felt, to console him somehow, to make it all better for him, even though it was me who had just been with the girl he loved. The best I managed was to pat his arm in a there way while he sobbed, his hands to his face. I stayed with him until finally it occurred to me that at the end of his crying, Buck might decide to throw me off the bridge. I fled into the darkness. At the dugout, Ed had already played Goodnight, My Love, and the place was empty. Sherman was gone, most likely catching a ride to English to the drive-in before hitching the rest of the way home. I looked at the clock inside the owl's nest and was surprised to see that it was well past midnight. There was a storm in the air, and as I hurried down the sidewalk, the first patter of rain came, and in the distance I saw lightning. A car eased up the road, and I stuck my thumb out, and it stopped. It was 2:00 a.m. before another ride got me all the way to Colwood. The rain was lashing the valley, and thunder and lightning crashed across the mountains. The tipple area of the mine seemed to be strangely lit. A big spotlight directed at the man hoist as my ride carried me past it. When I looked down the valley, there was a light on every porch, and I could see the dark shapes of people walking up the street toward the mine. The back door of my house stood wide open. I came inside cautiously and found Mom sitting at the kitchen table in front of her painting. She stared at me and spoke to me as if she were the guard to the very gates of hell. "You are not to go to the mine," she intoned gravely, as lightning split the air and turned her face bluish white. "No matter what else you do this night, you mustn't do that." So I would make a note here that what Sonny's mom is telling her is the literary device foreshadowing, because by her telling him not to go whatsoever, we know that something not good is going to be happening in the next section. So I would say the main notes in this chapter, a few different things happened. For one, Sonny's heart gets broken because Dorothy shows up at the dance with with his brother, Jim. And then Valentine ends up being with Sonny, which in turn breaks Buck's heart. So that's two very big things that happened in this chapter. So anyway, I would make notes of all those things, and then next time we get together, we will begin reading chapter 18, The Bump. So thank you, and have a good day.